Emily sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone screen. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking another long, quiet night. Her husband, Mark, was on another business trip, gone for weeks. Again, the house felt too big. Without him, too quiet. She scrolled through old photos, trying to remind herself that she was still happy, that love still lived in this place, but lately the silence had grown heavier than the walls themselves. She opened a chatting app she hadn't used in months. It was just to pass time, she told herself. Nothing more, a harmless way to feel less alone. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before typing a simple hello. She didn't expect a reply, but it came almost instantly. "Hey there, trouble sleeping too?" The name on the profile was just D. No picture, no details, only a gray silhouette. She hesitated but answered. "Anyway, yeah, just one of those nights." They talked about little things at first, how quiet nights made the world feel too far away, how people could sit in the same house and still feel miles apart. She found herself smiling at her phone, laughing softly when D joked about making coffee at midnight. D asked what she saw from her window. She said the soft orange glow of a streetlight and a cat that always sat under it, waiting for something. D said he could see the same light from where he was, and for a strange second her heart skipped. She wondered if maybe they lived close, but brushed the thought aside. Days passed and the chats grew longer. He never asked for photos, never flirted, just listened and shared stories about small-town life, about the sound of trains in the distance, about missing someone who was still there. Emily felt like she was hearing her own heart in his words. Mark called once every few days, his voice tired, distracted, filled with promises about being home soon, but each time he hung up, she went back to the chat, and the silence that followed didn't hurt as much. One evening, as rain tapped gently on the window, D sent a message saying he had something to confess. She felt a strange tension reading those words. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed back. "What is it?" he said. Sometimes he walked in the evenings and past a house that looked peaceful, light spilling through the curtains, someone sitting by the window with a cup in her hand. He said he always wondered what her story was. Emily froze, her pulse racing. Her eyes darted toward the window. She was sitting by it now, holding a cup of tea. She typed quickly, asking where he lived. He just replied, "Near enough to see what I should not." She tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he lived somewhere nearby. She told herself it was nothing, but she moved away from the window. Anyway, the next morning, she woke to find a small envelope slid under her front door. Inside was a folded napkin with a note that said, "Good coffee always tastes better with company." Her heart pounded. She didn't tell anyone. She just stared at the note for a long time, wondering if she should feel afraid or flattered. That night, she blocked the chat, deleted the app, and tried to forget, but the quiet returned heavier than before. She found herself thinking of his words, the calm voice that seemed to know her thoughts, the way he said things no one else ever noticed. When Mark called that weekend, she tried to sound normal, but there was a distance she couldn't hide. He promised again that work would settle soon, that they'd take a trip together. She said she missed him, but it sounded like a line from an old movie. Later that night, she heard soft footsteps outside the porch. She looked through the window and saw nothing but rain. She told herself it was her mind playing tricks. She turned off the lights and tried to sleep. Her phone buzzed. Once on the nightstand, she looked at the screen. It was a new message from an unknown number. It said, "I liked the blue mug better." She stared at it, frozen. That was the mug she had used that morning when she sat by the window. She felt a chill crawl up her spine. She typed back, "Who is this?" No reply. Came only silence and the sound of rain falling harder against the glass. In the morning, she went out to get the mail. Everything looked normal. The street quiet, the neighbors walking their dogs, the same cat under the same streetlight. She laughed softly at herself, thinking maybe it was someone from the neighborhood playing a silly joke, but when she stepped back toward the door, she noticed something small at her feet, a coffee cup placed neatly on the doormat, still warm. Emily stood frozen on the porch, the cup in front of her still steaming, the faint smell of coffee mixing with the cool morning air. She looked around, but the street was empty, the mailboxes lined in silence. The same as always. Her hands shook slightly as she bent down and touched the cup. It was warm, not long left there, maybe a few minutes. She stepped back into the house, locking the door behind her. Her heart beat fast, her breath uneven. She stared at the cup sitting on the counter and wondered how something so ordinary could feel so wrong. She told herself not to panic. Maybe a friend, maybe a delivery, maybe just a coincidence. She picked up her phone and searched for the number. that had texted her, but it was already gone, no. Message no history, as if it had never existed. The chat app she deleted was still gone too, but that night she dreamed of the messages, of his calm voice, of the words near. Enough to see what I should not. When she woke, she found herself looking out the window again. The same cat under the same streetlight, watching nothing. Later that day she went for a walk around the block, trying to quiet her thoughts. The houses all looked alike: clean lawns, cars in driveways, wine chimes. Moving in the light breeze, she passed the corner lot with the maple tree and saw a man standing by his garage. He waved politely. She nodded. Back, she thought he looked familiar, maybe from the store or maybe from somewhere else. His eyes lingered a moment, too long, before he turned away. She felt a strange pull to look back, but didn't. When Mark finally came home that weekend, he brought flowers and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. She told him about the messages, but softened the story, making it sound like a harmless mistake. Someone probably texting the wrong number. He frowned, said she should be careful, maybe change her locks, but she could tell he wasn't really listening. His phone kept buzzing, his attention somewhere else. They had dinner and he talked about work and deadlines and meetings. She nodded, pretending everything was fine, but her mind stayed with the cup on the porch. That night she couldn't sleep. She walked to the living room and stood by the window. The street was empty again, except for one house across the road with a single light glowing faintly. She hadn't noticed that house before, or maybe she never paid attention. A shadow moved inside the window for a brief second, tall and slow. She felt a cold wave wash through her. She backed away, and the floor creaked beneath her feet. The sound felt louder than it should have. She went back to bed, but didn't close her eyes until morning. The next afternoon, Mark left again. Another trip, another promise. She stood at the door, watching his car disappear around the corner. The silence returned, swallowing the house whole. She made coffee, but couldn't bring herself to drink it. She opened her laptop, wanting distraction, checked her email, scrolled without meaning, then stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. A new message had arrived from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line read, "I see you still like the window." She opened it, her hands trembling. The message inside said, "Same light, same cup, same blue sweater." Her chest tightened. She looked down, realizing she was wearing the blue sweater, now the same one she wore in her profile picture months ago. The one D once said looked warm. She slammed the laptop shut, her pulse racing. She grabbed her phone and called the number back, but it didn't ring. It didn't even exist anymore. That night the wind was strong, rattling the branches against the windows. She turned on every light in the house, trying to chase the fear away. She sat in the kitchen, her back against the wall, and waited. At exactly midnight, the doorbell rang once, a sharp sound that echoed through the hall. She froze, unable to move. The bell didn't ring again, only that one time after a long moment. She stood up slowly and walked to the door. She peeked through the small glass panel. There was no one outside, only a coffee cup on the porch, and beside it a folded napkin with writing. She opened the door, her fingers trembling. The note read, "You do not have to be alone anymore." Her vision blurred for a moment, from fear or tears. She couldn't tell. She looked down the street and saw him, standing under the same streetlight. The man from the garage, the same shape she saw in that window weeks ago. He didn't move. He just stood there, looking at her. She whispered his name, though she didn't know how she knew it. D. He began walking toward her slowly, step by step, his face hidden in shadow. She backed away into the house, her heart thudding. With every sound, he stopped at the edge of the porch, his voice calm, the same tone she remembered from the messages. He said, "I just wanted to see if you were real." She said, "Please leave." He smiled softly. "Said you kept talking long after I stopped typing. You wanted someone to listen. Remember, you said that." She reached for her phone to call someone, anyone, but the screen was blank dead, no signal. The lights flickered once, then steadied again. When she looked back, he was gone, the porch empty, the street still. She closed the door, locked it twice, slid down against it, trying to catch her breath. She stayed there for hours, until the first light of dawn crept across the floor. When she finally opened the door, the cup was gone. No note, no sign of footsteps, only the faint smell of coffee lingering in the cool morning air. She thought maybe it was over. Maybe she had dreamed it all. But when she went back inside, her phone buzzed once more. A new message from an unknown number. It said, "I liked the way you looked tonight." She stared at the screen, frozen in place, her reflection faint in the glass, and behind it, in the darkened window, another figure standing still, just outside the frame, watching. Emily could not breathe. The message on her phone glowed in the dim light. She stared at it, unable to move, unable to think. She turned her head toward the window slowly, Afraid of what she might see, the street outside looked still. Quiet calm, the same cat under the same streetlight. Watching nothing, but she felt it. She felt the air shift like someone standing just out of sight. She tried to convince herself she was imagining things, that the mind could play cruel tricks. When it was lonely enough, she whispered to herself, "It is nothing, it is no one." She turned off the phone and placed it face down on the table, but her hands would not stop shaking. She made coffee, trying to feel normal, but the smell of it only reminded her of him, of Dee, of every word that had somehow found its way into her life. Hours passed in silence. The daylight stretched thin across the floor. She sat on the couch with the curtains half drawn, trying to read, trying to stay awake. She did not notice when she drifted into sleep, but she woke to a sound of faint tapping somewhere inside the house, not the front door, not the windows. It was closer, softer, like fingers brushing against the wall. She held her breath. Listening, the sound came again, slow, deliberate, steady. She stood up, heart pounding, moved toward the sound. It led her to the study, the small room where she used to chat with Dee. She opened the door. The room was dim, only the computer screen glowing faintly, though she was sure she had shut it off. The chat window was open again, a message blinking at the bottom. It said, "Do you believe me now?" She stepped closer, her voice a whisper. "Who are you? Why are you doing this?" Another message appeared. "You said you wanted someone." Stepped closer, her voice a whisper. "Who are you? Why are you doing this?" Another message appeared. "You said you wanted someone who saw you, not someone who only passed through. You said you wanted to be understood." She backed away, shaking her head. No, this is not real." She unplugged the computer. The light went out. The house went quiet again. She called Mark again, no answer. She left a message, saying she needed him to come home. Something was wrong. She could not explain what just wrong. She sat by the door, waiting until exhaustion took her eyes closed, and when she opened them again, it was dark, the house silent. She reached for her phone to check the time and saw a notification. A new message from the same number. It said, "I came inside." Because the door was open, she froze. The phone slipped from her hand. She turned slowly toward the hallway, her heart slamming against her ribs. There was movement, a faint shadow at the end of the hall. "Someone standing just beyond the light," she whispered. "Please stop," her voice breaking. Whoever it was stepped forward, a tall shape, calm, quiet, and somehow familiar. She could barely see his face, but she knew that voice when it came. He said, "I never wanted to scare you. I just wanted to know if you were real." She backed away, tears stinging her eyes. She said, "Please leave." He took another step closer, and into the light she saw him clearly now. It was Mark. He looked different somehow. Colder eyes, darker face, tired. He smiled gently, said, "You always looked so beautiful when you thought no one was watching." She stared at him, confused, whispering, "What are you saying?" He laughed softly. "You wanted someone to talk to, someone who listened. I wanted the same you. Stopped looking at me long ago, so I made someone you could talk to, someone who was still me." He stepped closer, his voice low and calm. "I was Dee all along. I was every word, every message, every night you thought you were alone. I was there." She shook her head, unable to understand, her body trembling. She whispered, "Why?" He said, "Because you stopped seeing me, and I wanted to know if you would ever find your way back." She stepped back, tears running down her face. She said, "You scared me. You made me afraid." He looked away for a moment, then back at her, his eyes soft, almost sad. He said, "I just wanted to be close again." Silence filled the house, the kind that presses against your chest. She could hear her heartbeat in the faint hum of the refrigerator. "Nothing else?" she whispered. "You could have just talked to me." He nodded slowly, said, "Maybe, but you only listen to the stranger, not to me." His voice cracked, and for the first time she saw regret on his face. He placed the phone on the table beside her, said, "No more messages," then turned and walked out the door. She stood there, frozen, for a long time, until the sound of the car faded down the street. She sank to the floor, her breath uneven, her chest tight. She wanted to scream, but only silence came out when morning light touched the windows. She looked around the house. Everything felt different, lighter, somehow emptier. She thought it was over, but when she reached for her phone, one last message appeared unsent. Draft half written. On the screen it said, "Sometimes people see each other only when they stop pretending." She deleted the message, closed the phone, and walked to the window, the same streetlight still glowing, the same cat sitting beneath it. She smiled faintly through tears, picked up her blue mug, and whispered goodbye to the quiet that had once kept her company. From that day on, the porch light stayed off every night, and the coffee cup never returned.